Today's podcast includes commentary from a guest speaker. Neither the RIA Compliance Collective nor RIA Compliance Concepts is affiliated with the speaker or the company he or she represents.
Hello, everyone. Here is Clarifying Custody Part 2.
Whether your advisory firm has 1 or 5 people, compliance will always be an issue. RIA Compliance Concepts is more than just another service provider. We truly care about seeing our clients prosper. That's why we started our podcast, the RIA Compliance Collective, providing up-to-date compliance guidance. We're passionate about doing our job so you can focus on doing your job. We understand regulatory compliance like the back of our hands, from full-service RIA registration to annual compliance reviews and everything in between. We're here to get you there.
So with that being said, what about inadvertent custody?
Yeah, inadvertent custody, is where you're not even aware that you have it, right? So the SEC tried to clarify this in an investment management guidance update, that an RIA may inadvertently have custody of client funds or securities because of some provisions that they might have in a separate custodial agreement between its advisory client and a qualified custodian, to which the RIA is not even a party to. According to the update, the guidance update, a custodial agreement permitting the qualified custodian to accept instructions from an RIA to disperse or transfer funds or securities from the custodial account other than to effect or settle trades will establish custody, even though in the conferral of such authority, conflicts with the provisions of the advisory agreement between the RIA and the client. So it gets very technical, but basically it's the investment advisor isn't aware of what's in these other agreements that they're not even a party to, but in effect they are, because it affects their custody. So basically the SEC staff reasoned that this approach still best promotes the cornerstone interest in the custody rule of safeguarding client assets. As it turns out, as far as like authorizing the withdrawal or securities to the qualified custodian. Further, it states, I'm reading this from the actual guidance update, the staff noted that a qualified custodian may not be aware of a bilateral agreement between the RIA and the client and is likely to rely on any authorization in the custodial agreement if instructed by the advisor to release funds or securities. There is some relief, though, on this rule, for the custody rule for an RIA, where this might happen. And the custodial agreement must permit the qualified custodian to disperse cash from the account upon the advisor's instructions only if the custodian is in good faith believes the instructions to be in connection with, in accordance with, securities training or the deduction of advisory fees. Again, going back to that. And then in certain situations, there's pieces where you could have different agreements covering this. So it's specifically laid out, and we'll cover that a little bit later on how that might be structured internally between you and the client. So again, going to my point, according to the guidance update, one way an RIA can avoid having custody due to some of these provisions is to draft a letter or another document addressed to the qualified custodian that limits the RIA's authority to delivery versus payment, notwithstanding any provisions in the custodial agreement. And to be effective, the client and qualified custodian, they have to acknowledge the letter by written consent. And if they do that, then you're not subject to the surprise exam. So it gets a little convoluted with that because you really don't. The point of, I guess, all this is to know what agreements are out there that even though you're not a party to them, make sure that it doesn't affect your custody.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. So what about custody established through an asset transfer authorization or standing letters of authorization? I'm assuming this is in reference to about 2 years ago when the SEC put out a regulatory notice regarding this. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this issue?
Sure. As you mentioned, there was a no action letter to the Investment Advisors Association by the SEC staff. And that indicated, in connection, like you said, with the standing letter of instruction or a similar asset transfer authorization established by the RIA's client with the qualified custodian, the RIA generally has access to and custody of the assets in the following circumstances, being authorizing the qualified custodian to transfer assets upon the RIA's instruction to one or more third parties specified by the client or for any other purpose other than authorized trading. the Investment Advisors Association had requested a no action letter, no action relief, I should say, on the basis that these agreements are written authorizations directly addressed from the client to the qualified custodian, grant a limited authorization to the advisor to act as the client's agent for a specific purpose, and allow the client to retain full power, charge, and revoke the arrangement. In its response, the staff concluded that such an authorization nonetheless grants an advisor authority to obtain possession or withdraw client funds and the authority of the custody rule, which it was actually designed to address. The staff explained that under these circumstances, an RIA to whom a client grants such authority has custody of the assets and is subject to the custody rule surprise exam requirement. However, it wouldn't recommend enforcement action against an advisor that didn't obtain a surprise exam where it acts pursuant to this SLOA under these circumstances, which kind of goes back to the other piece that I mentioned, where the client provides an instruction letter to the qualified custodian in writing, signed by everybody. Everybody's aware of what's going on. The client authorizes the advisor in writing, either on a qualified custodian's form or separately, to direct transfers to the third party. And there's some other rules that follow with this as well that help you to not have to, even though you have custody, but by following these specific guidelines, you're not subject to the surprise exam.
That's pretty interesting, but that leads off to a couple of one-off questions that an IA might have. Like, for example, what if there is a transfer between the client's own accounts? Is there a custody in this situation?
Right. The SEC also revised, there was initial response to this that they had, and they've actually revised that if the client authorizes the RIA to transfer the client funds or securities between or among, two or more of the client's own accounts, as you had asked, and maintained by the same custodian or maybe even a different custodian, the SEC indicated that a grant of authority limited to such transfers will not establish custody if the client has authorized the advisor in writing to effect such transfer and a copy of the authorization specifying the client's accounts has been provided to the qualified custodian, to the one sending it. There's certain things in this authorization that must be included, including, the sending and receiving accounts, including the ABA routing numbers, the names on the accounts, the custodian, sending custodian, to make sure the sending custodian has a record that the client has identified the accounts for which the transfer is being effected. So there's a lot of rules in here as well that if you follow them, you're not going to be subject to the exam. So, for instance, if the staff further says that the RIA's authority to transfer these assets between or among client accounts, all of whom have access to the sending and receiving account numbers and client account numbers, doesn't constitute custody, and like I said, you're not further subject to the client's accounts and the authorization. So you're not, in those cases, you're not subject to the exam. So I guess it comes down to really understanding what all these agreements are that you have with these groups, and then getting your documents in place to do what you need to do so you don't have custody. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but when you can, it's probably worth the effort to go through just to be sure that you're in compliance.
Yeah, and making sure that the financial institutions following the ACAT rules and the and transfer rules that they have to follow by.
Now for a short break.
DSWD, a PCAOB registered CPA firm, your RIA experts specializing in surprise custody exams. To learn more, visit www.dscpagroup.com or call 708-489-1680.
And now, back to the podcast.
Now, just to reiterate, the whole point of this conversation is the surprise exam process. And with what an investment advisor needs to do to prepare for efficient, accurate testing of this surprise examination.
Sure. Yeah, I'll cover that. Basically, if you feel that you have custody and now the surprise exam is part of what you need to do, obviously contact, a PCOB registered firm that does these. And the auditor, and I'll give you specific examples of what we do and how we do it. Some might do it differently. Is we'll select the date. We'll select the surprise exam date. So, for instance, if we select June 30th, first we'll get an engagement letter with the RIA And then at some point, we'll do the quote unquote surprise and say, okay, it's going to be June 30th. We're doing it. And we'll let that RIA know right around that date, before or after, just so they're aware of it, because there's certain things that they will need to get to us. And this way they're aware of it. And they can, as soon as June 30th passes, they can provide the documents to us. And basically, we ask for, from the initial request, a listing of all the assets that you believe you would deem to have custody as of that date that we choose. We need a listing of the accounts that, that closed prior to the surprise exam date, to the current year exam date. So that can kind of become an issue. Let's say you haven't had a surprise exam in a couple of years, but you should have. We try to address that as well in our selection process. The listing of accounts, they maybe have a zero balance at surprise exam date. We need to see those, and a copy of or amendments to your custody or investment management agreements. So we'll review those agreements between the company and third-party custodians. And then we make a selection of the accounts that you, the RA, have told us you have custody. We'll make a selection of those, and we will confirm those accounts. And there's different ways that we do that. One is we can send them in a positive confirmation form, meaning we'll send Dear Investor, and it would be on the RIA's letterhead. Dear Investor, our CBA firm, DSWD, is conducting a surprise exam as of June 30th, 2020. We have attached a copy of your June 30th, 2020 investment statement, which they already either have online or however they have it. But we send it to them and say, please sign this confirmation if everything is in line and looks proper to you. If it doesn't, tell us what the difference is and where these variances might be. And that gets sent directly to us. So the RA does not see that. They're totally out of the loop on that. So we're hoping that obviously there's no discrepancies, but if they are, they come to us first so the RA doesn't see that response. It keeps that independence piece that we need. Depending on how many custody accounts there are, we'll send some negative ones, meaning it's the similar letter, but only return that letter if there's an issue. The positive confirmation we need back regardless if there's an issue or not. And we might even send one transaction confirmation or a couple transactions just so the clients will see, oh yeah, I did do this or want this done. And so everything is good. Let's sign off and send it back to us. And like I said, each confirmation is on your or the RIA letterhead and signed by the rep from the RIA, chief compliance officer, CEO, whoever it might be. They actually sign the letter, but we handle all the mailing of those as well. And if some of the positive confirmations we don't receive back, we have a set of alternate procedures that we do to help mitigate not sending it back, but we find our answers if we can. And then after the fact, when we're done with everything and we have the report ready, there's the ADVE, which I mentioned earlier. We'll take care of the filing of that, from our end directly into the FINRA site, and we just put it up there directly. You do get a copy of the report and confirmation electronically showing that it was submitted. So you have that for your records. It does take some time. It certainly depends on the number of accounts that we're confirming, the number of accounts that the RIA has custody. But I mentioned earlier, I think, that if we're only testing the accounts for the custody piece on the accounts that the RIA has provided us that have custody, we're not doing a selection of the other ones to determine if there's custody or not. We're only looking at the ones that the RIA has told us they have custody of. And that's all due 120 days after the date selected.
That's great information because we get questions about that and the timing and whatnot. So, Rick, we're about to wind down the podcast. And again, thank you so much for taking part in it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We have one fun question, just off topic, just a fun question we ask most of our podcast guests. So what would be your superpower, and what superpower would you have and why?
Well, you know what? That's a good question. I'm actually a history buff, both like real history and family history. So I would like my superpower to be time travel, if I could do it.
That's
to go back,
awesome.
and the historical pieces, the big ones, and also the family stuff, to ask all the questions that you didn't when they were around or those that you never even met to see what's going on. So I would love to do that.
Yeah. weird as that we think they were.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a great one. I don't think we've heard of that one from any of our guests.
yeah, I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a superpower or not, but it is,
I would classify it as a superpower. That'd be awesome to have. All right. Well, anyway, thank you so much again, Rick.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, Colin. And we'll have some link to Rick's bio and information in our podcast notes or show notes. We'll also have links to some of the SEC guidance regarding custody in our show notes. And as always, we're here to get you there.
Thank you for listening to the RIA Compliance Collective. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to experience the RIA compliance concepts difference yourself, visit RIACC.io. From mock audits to customized compliance procedures, ongoing compliance assistance, and beyond. We're here for you always. Keep listening to discover more on how you can keep your advisory firm compliant so you can focus on achieving your goals. RIA Compliance Concepts. We're here to get you there.